Welcome back. You're watching The Money Show on ET Now. Well, just yesterday, the government has announced a series of changes to e-commerce rules. They are just draft proposals yet, but this is largely what the final shape of e-commerce rules could look like. Now, e-commerce obviously means, from a customer perspective, the shopping websites that you and I use ever so often, especially during the pandemic. But these rules could sort of change that whole online shopping landscape, change our experience as well. So what exactly are the rules? We have with us Archana Tiwari, the partner at J. Sagar Associates. Archana, thank you so much for taking out time and joining us. So why don't we start off by discussing these draft e-commerce rules? How will it change, the shopping experience, the online shopping experience for the customer?
So I think there were, what the government was trying to do, the stated objective was to solve for a number of problems that consumers had highlighted, and possibly also that other industry stakeholders had highlighted in terms of having a level playing field, ensuring that consumers are not buying into fly-by-the-night operators who are just operating in India to a very limited extent and therefore are not really protecting the consumer's interests. So there are a lot of points that have to be considered and a lot of proposed changes that have to be unpacked over here. Of course, the one thing that's sort of caught everybody's attention is the flash sale aspect of it. But that again needs to be understood a little bit more in the context of what exactly is sought to be prohibited. The other aspect, of course, is the emphasis on entities which are outside India but which have an electronic presence in India or are able to sell to consumers in India. How they will be held accountable in terms of having a nodal officer and a compliance officer. So earlier there was an attempt to have, these entities sort of register in India and have a presence in India, but the mechanism for it wasn't clear. Now there is an attempt to have actual individuals resident in India be accountable for these actions. There is also an attempt to bring in concepts from exchange control laws in terms of, how entities what sort of sellers are permitted, what the relationships between the sellers and the logistics providers should be, etc. And to some extent, there is an attempt to protect consumer data. So to regulate how a marketplace or an e-commerce entity can use that consumer data is also something that's been put into the rules. So there are a lot of changes, and each of these changes are important. So it's important to understand how these play out for consumers and also for other stakeholders.
Okay, Archana, what exactly is meant by flash sales here? Are we talking about those one-day mega sale days, which, to be honest, all of us wait by for? We save all of our, shopping lists for those days. So is it those one-day bumper sales that they are talking about? And, how exactly were they unfair to customers as per these rules?
So the flash sale that they're really talking about here, it's interesting because the regulations say that what they're trying to prevent are fraudulent flash sales, where it's for a short period of time and certain specific sellers are benefiting from it, and those sellers are possibly associated with the marketplace platform. And so that's really, again, going into ensuring a level playing field as well as protecting consumer interests from for consumers who are looking at these sales and thinking, oh, this is the best that I can get, or it must be so good that I have to jump and buy this offer. So that's one thing. The other thing that in terms of the explanations that have been provided or the press releases that have been provided, what they seem to say is, what we're trying to prevent is if there is a seller who doesn't actually have the inventory. And what they're doing is, as soon as an order is placed, they're doing a back-to-back or a flash sale from someone associated with the marketplace. And so that is also a flash sale in that sense, or a back-to-back sale. And that again is not really good for the market because it's a seller who doesn't have the inventory or the substance to actually service. And there seems to be a relationship between the seller and the marketplace. So that independence of the sellers in the marketplace is not protected. So both these concepts are referred to in the draft rules as well as in the press releases. But essentially what they're trying to prevent from happening is an instant sale which is open for a very short period of time, where the sellers are someone who have some connection with the marketplace, and so it's trying to drive sales for those people. That's really what they're trying to prohibit, because they're referring to it as fraudulent sales in that sense. So the intent is not to prohibit generally the sales that marketplaces offer or e-commerce websites offer. It's something that's fraudulent, or there's more to the in the background than a straightforward sale.
Okay. Archana, tell us a bit about this filter mechanism for country of origin. Will customers now be able to choose the country that the product is made?
Very likely, because at a minimum, it looks like what they're expecting companies to do is to have a filter where you can select which, whether you want to buy products made in India, or whether you want to buy products, whether you're open to buying products made outside India. So there is a push for domestic goods, and there is a clear statement that marketplaces should not favor imported goods over domestic goods, and there should be a level playing field for domestic sellers as well as sellers who sell imported products. So, and also the emphasis on ranking. So the way that products are displayed, the ranking should not be something that, even if it's based on on an unbiased technological methodology, the ranking should not be seen to push imported products over domestic products. So that's another thing that where the push is for domestic products, so that domestic sellers and domestic manufacturers are promoted as well.
Archana, what will be the rights of customers in case if they have any grievances? What's the role that this nodal compliance officer and the resident grievance officer that you mentioned will play over here?
So there are a lot of measures which are being considered for the benefit of consumers. So the earlier rules do have the construct of a nodal officer, but that nodal officer was more going to look into ensuring that the e-commerce entity is compliant with the consumer protection laws. What has happened is now the draft rules seem to suggest that there will be 3 separate officers, essentially. One will be the nodal officer, and then there will be a chief compliance officer who will ensure compliance with the act and the rules. And then there will also be a grievance officer. Now, the rules earlier also and other laws also require you to have a disclosure of whom to contact in case there's a problem with the products, etc. So the marketplace has to have, or the e-commerce entity has to have a grievance officer whose details are described on the website and easily accessible for consumers. There is also a requirement to have the grievance redressal mechanism being clearly put on the website. And there is a requirement that if a complaint is made, then the grievance officer has to acknowledge the complaint within 48 hours and resolve the complaint within a month. Also, the sellers on the platform are required to have similar mechanisms in place. So they're also required to ensure that there is a grievance officer. They're also required to ensure that consumer complaints are addressed within 48 hours. There is this interesting concept of fallback liability, which has been brought in. So in certain circumstances where the seller behaves in an unethical or illegal manner, and the consumer grievance remains open, there could be fallback liability for the e-commerce entity or the marketplace as well. So that's a very interesting concept, where now we are telling the e-commerce marketplace player or platform that there could be liability for them as well.
Now, there is abolition of differential treatment by delivery companies. So does that mean that regardless of the product I buy, my delivery cost will not be different?
I would put it differently and say that it's more regardless of which seller a consumer opts to buy from, the price should not vary basis the logistics cost. So the logistics of service provider who is said to be sort of related to who is associated with the marketplace is not supposed to have differential pricing for different sellers. And if they do, then they're required to explain what the rationale for that is. So again, the idea seems to be to ensure that certain sellers don't benefit from differences in logistics costs, and the consumer ultimately doesn't see a lower price for certain sellers as opposed to other sellers, because the logistics cost in the background differs for those sellers. So yes, I mean, to the consumer, it would basically be that the price that they're seeing from one seller should ideally be the same as another seller, because the logistics costs should not be a differentiating factor.
Okay, and finally, Archana, there are some indications of right of privacy of data as well. You know, when we shop online, we're giving out all kinds of data, names, addresses, telephone numbers, in a way, disclosing our shopping preferences as well. So tell us about, why is the obligation of the website now to ensure they don't release this data to other third-party websites?
So that's actually a very interesting aspect that is in the law. So there was some language regarding consent earlier, but now what the proposed language seems to suggest is that if the platform seeks to share the data of the consumers with any other person, then that consumer has to provide an express and written consent in terms of how the data can be shared and who it can be shared with. It can't be, for instance, in the terms of use or in some other page on the website where you say that by using the website or accessing the website, you're accepting these aspects. It can't be that it's a click wrap or a checkbox kind of consent where the consumer can just, most of the times consumers would probably just check that without really reading what the implications are. So it looks like what they're expecting platforms to do is to highlight to the consumer that their data is going to be shared with other persons, and the consumer understands that and gives the consent for the same. There is also another provision which is proposed, which basically says that if a platform has its own labels in that sense, then the data of consumers can't be used for the benefit of sellers of those products. So that's another interesting aspect that's in the draft rules. So yeah, I mean, there is a definite intent to protect the data of consumers from being used by platforms for probably their own preferred sellers' benefits or for the benefit of their own brand.
Okay, well, Archana, thank you so much for joining us today on The Money Show and helping us understand these draft rules on e-commerce, and hopefully I think we'll be seeing it turning into reality soon. For now, of course, let's move on now and hear some good news for all travel enthusiasts. Indigo Airlines has decided to give a 10% discount to all vaccinated travelers. Obviously, you have to be 18 and above for this rule because vaccination right now is open for only adults. This is, of course, in a bid to motivate more and more citizens to vaccinate themselves. So India's largest low-cost airline has taken this step. So don't wait any further, vaccinate and you can avail this discount and many more discounts as well that a lot of consumer-oriented companies seem to be offering you only and only if you are vaccinated. But I think with that, we are completely out of time as well on The Money Show, so we'll wrap it up. Thank you so much for watching. Stay tuned to ET Now.